Crash Bandicoot on the PS1 was way ahead of its time. Not only did this game finally give the PlayStation the iconic mascot it desperately needed to compete with the likes of the obese Italian plumber, it also showed that 3D games didn't have to be so complicated and difficult to control, while still being challenging enough to put the player through hell, because if you've ever played the first Crash game, you'll know how excruciating it is. You see, when the original PlayStation released in the mid-90s, it was met with instant success and was absolutely dominating the competition. Nintendo and Sega got absolutely annihilated during that generation. They couldn't stand a chance.
Your worst nightmare has arrived. Pack up your stuff!
However, despite its superior hardware and game format, the PlayStation was lacking an identity. It was just this grey toilet seat looking thing that played games and music CDs. So Sony ended up hiring Naughty Dog to create a new game with an iconic mascot to represent the PlayStation. After brainstorming for ideas like Willy Wombat.
Something wrong?
They settled on Crash Bandicoot since he was a bandicoot who crashed into boxes.
No shit!
One of the many reasons Crash was so popular was because of how simple to understand he was. I mean, when you boot the game, you see him get experimented on by some weirdo with an N on his forehead, and another guy with bolts in his head. Next thing you know, Crash jumps out the window, lands on the beach,
unfazed,
ready to venture through all 3 islands filled with levels that progressively go from vibrant jungles and sunny beaches to dark temples and toxic wastelands, in order to save his big booty Latina bandicoot.
prepare the female.
Crash was made to appeal to everyone who already owned a PlayStation, as well as those who didn't have a PlayStation already and were tired of violently blowing into cartridges just to play Wave Race. Anyone could pick it up, play it, and instantly fall in love with it. You had a simple cartoonish plot to save your loved one from the 3'4" scientist, stunning levels that were incredibly vibrant, polished, and way ahead of its time, and an atmospheric soundtrack that really makes you feel like you're on this big-ass adventure, with Dr. Cortex's castle eerily looming in the background of some levels as you progress through the game. Even the controls were less complicated than most Genesis and Super Nintendo games up to that point, with just move, jump, and attack. But don't let that fool you, because this game can be pretty painful to get through because of its difficulty.
Man, that shit pissed me off.
It may not be anywhere near as revolutionary as Super Mario 64, which came out that same year, or anywhere near as good as its sequels, but it was still loved for its simple yet detailed level designs, easy to learn but yet infuriatingly challenging gameplay, and overall just a well-designed 3D platformer. Although despite its simplicity, Crash's debut game still has plenty of variety when it comes to the amount of different level segments, designs, and other features. You've got your typical side-scrolling levels, the iconic boulder chases.
Why are you chasing me?
I try and pretend this part never happened.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
And most importantly, you have the most common level type in its beautiful 3D polygonal glory. The developers even referred to Crash Bandicoot as the Sonic's ass game, because you're playing from the perspective of Crash's juicy, voluptuous cheeks.
Huh?
You do also have 6 boss fights in this game, and even though I'm calling these levels boss fights, they are pretty fucking pathetic and overall, I guess, very underwhelming. You have Papu Papu, who is a fucking joke. Ripperoo is kinda interesting, but still boring, and his laugh gives me a fucking migraine. Koala Kong is alright, but when he isn't throwing shit at you, he's either flexing like some constipated fat gronk, or showing off his cheeks, which aren't quite on the same level of quality compared to Crash's. Pinstripe is even more pathetic than Papu Papu, considering all you do is attack, hide, and repeat. I mean, he has a Tommy gun cunt, and yet he's completely wasted.
You're a fucking disappointment.
Embryo is actually somewhat of a decent boss, and is easily my favourite just because of the part where he skulls down fuck knows what like an absolute champion and transforms into the Incredible Hulk. What a sick cunt. And finally, you end off the game with Dr. Cortex's boss fight, who's realistically the best boss in the game since he offers the most amount of variety and isn't as easy to wipe the floor with like the others. Although I don't think any sane, logical human being would honestly complain about the mid-boss fights, considering how excruciating it can be to get through the rest of the game for so many different reasons that I don't even know where to begin, cunt. Controlling Crash feels stiffer than my while watching the Shrek quadrilogy. which makes a lot of platforming sections that should be piss easy so much more difficult to land. Combine that with unwanted floaty jumps, slippery landings that can make you slide off a platform if you don't make the jump to the next platform precisely enough, and you have the perfect recipe for a clunky, stiff, jank wank of a platformer. You can really feel how much of a dopey cunt Crash can be to control with many of the levels in this game, like those bridge levels that visually look pretty unique, but besides that, are so unnecessarily annoying to get through for no reason. You can sometimes cheese these annoying bridge levels by running on the ropes until the game cock blocks you, and if you're really unlucky, you'll fall through the fucking floor like I did, cause why wouldn't you? The hog levels are even more excruciating to get through because of, yet again, the stiffness. And I can't even think of Crash the same way after. However, by far the most infuriating level in the original Crash is Slippery Climb. There is no possible way to describe how it feels to beat Slippery Climb unless you play it for yourself. The amount of patience and perfect precision in your timing you need to make any of these obstacles can only be performed by a true Jedi Knight whose connection to the Force is uncomprehendable for the weak-minded. Others who don't wield the patience shall be driven into committing mass genocide in anger and fear of not being able to beat Slippery Climb. I think the most ironic part of Slippery Climb is that it's actually a much easier version of the infamous level that was scrapped from the original game for being way too difficult, simply known as Stormy Ascent, which could only be accessed by using Game Shark codes before it got remastered and sold as DLC for the Insane Trilogy. This game punishes you even more by not letting you save your game unless you collect gems, keys, and by completing the bonus levels, which you get by breaking every box in a level, and in some cases without dying, and collecting these horrific faces off the ground. Those Cortex and Brio bonus levels do not tickle my pickle the right way, to say the least. And are we going to talk about how our big booty Latina Bandicoot got her own bonus levels?
Excuse me, what the actual fuck?
And once again, she's just standing in the Great Hall, ready for you to fly off into the sunset once you've collected all the gems and keys, even though she's supposed to be kidnapped. I gave up trying to think about many aspects of this game logically a while ago. You could just type in the super password to unlock 100%, but you won't be able to save it to your memory card since the game has already been beaten, giving you no further opportunity to save your game, which props to Naughty Dog from stopping that one dickhead on the playground from trying to flex that he beat Crash 100%. But yeah, this game is painful to complete 100%. Everyone who's played Crash 1 before knows what it's like to have one box missing. The camera in some areas, especially when backtracking through a level to break any boxes you may have missed, makes the whole 100% completion process even more difficult, and there's so many hidden boxes in places that you wouldn't even think to look. So unless you want to permanently vanish from society to beat the original version of Crash 1 100%, don't do it. All that extra effort just to not fight Cortex, who's a decent boss anyway, isn't worth it at all. It's still the only game out of the original 3 Crash games that I've never 100%ed to this day. Overall, I believe Crash 1 is a pretty flawed game, but realistically is a solid 3D platformer that not only proved 3D games didn't have to be so complicated and flashy like Mario 64, but was also a genius way to show off the true potential of the PlayStation. Crash was such a huge deal to the point to where barely anyone believed that the game was even capable of running on the PS1's hardware when a demo was first shown off at E3, and many people speculated that Sony was hiding more powerful hardware to even run it in the first place, which only proves how visually impressive this game was. And if it wasn't for this game, we wouldn't have this absolute banger.
What have I got?
Even though Crash's humble beginnings isn't as close to being as good as the sequels that would follow shortly after, you still have to put some respect on the original game for kickstarting this god-tier franchise that's by far my favourite series to ever come out for the PS1. And Crash 1 is funnily enough the first game I ever remember playing, which must have been when I was like 2 or 3. Despite many of its shortcomings and infuriating difficulty, it's still worth trying today whether you play the original PS1 version or take the bitch way out and play the Insane Trilogy remaster so you can save your game anytime you want. I don't blame you if you do. But I swear to God, cunt, if I miss one more fucking box again, I'll bash your fucking orange head in, you dog cunt.